you for being here, Attorney General. Glad for you to be able to be here. My concern is that if I went back 35 years ago, and Congress was conducting hearings and conversations about pushing power generation out of natural gas into coal and into nuclear, because we were, quote unquote, running out of natural gas. And so no more natural gas power plants out there. Folks that were using that need to go into coal. Now, plus 35 years, now the Federal Government is saying, no, coal might not be a good idea. Let's try natural gas and see how that works and see if that's better, or see if we can use wind. And as we continue to adjust and at the preferences of the Federal Government, and now to use a series of studies to be able to justify how we want companies to be able to move, that's very difficult on power generation, who can't just plan for next year. They have to plan for next decade on what they are going to construct. My concern is the cumulative effect of all of these regulations, and if that has been evaluated, is it your opinion of all the things that are coming down, and I've got 3 pages worth of different regs that are coming down right now out of EPA on power generation, whether that be 316B, whether that be the cross-state rules, whether that be whatever it may be for coal, and there's a whole litany of different issues from coal from the time it comes out of the ground all the way until it's fly ash at that point at the end. Do you feel like that has been adequately studied in this hurry to be able to get through this almost 1 million different comments that have been made in it? Was the cumulative effects also evaluated in this?
If you're asking me, do I think it was done adequately? Absolutely not. I mean, and this hasn't even gone to OMB yet, and they are still setting a finalization date in the middle of December. That's normally itself a 90-day process. And, of course, it's November now. So that isn't going to happen if they're going to keep to the schedule they've laid out. And that has absolutely not been looked at. And you mentioned something that triggered a thought, and my Congressman had mentioned it earlier with respect to greenhouse gases, and I think of the switching of fuels. You know, the fact that we had sued EPA over their improper process or in the greenhouse gas endangerment finding was raised by earlier. And what's interesting about this is if that's so important, this makes it worse. And that hasn't been looked at either in any serious way. Or maybe it's buried in those 960,000 comments, but it seems the timeline has been set up so that they won't be reviewed, not that so that they will.
Right. And that is my concern, is that there has not been enough time to be able to go through this. The President has been very urgent to say we need to look at cumulative effects of regulations. If that has not occurred, to be able to gather cumulative effects of all these different regs that are coming down and the speed that they're coming down and the size of them. One of the statements that was made by EPA was that this may have a potential of, what is it, $10.9 billion in annual cost on the economy. Well, just that one regulation alone, $10.9 billion. Then you start adding to it all the different areas of 316B and everything else that's coming down on it. It's fairly significant what's happening. And I understand previous comments that have been made to say we continue to add regulations to the power industry, but the power continues to go down. I would presuppose at some point that doesn't work anymore. You can't just throw in 1,000 regulations and say we're going to continue to drive the cost down by adding more regulations. It doesn't work that way. At some point, you've got to have some common sense. Agree or disagree with that?
I would certainly agree with that, and I would also note that Executive Order 13563 requires EPA and other regulators, and I'll quote, that's why I'm going to read my notes, to tailor its regulations to impose the least burden on society consistent with attaining regulatory objectives, taking into account the costs of cumulative regulations. And EPA has not performed a cumulative regulation cost analysis for the utility MAC.
Okay. What about the effect on reliability of power in the days to come?
I understand that is widely debated here. It's not much debated in Virginia. We're looking at, just for one of our utilities, probably $250 million of transmission infrastructure costs. And again, those by law pass right through to the ratepayers. But on top of that, from a public policy standpoint, I was in the State Senate. These are the ones people scream about. This is where power lines are going to be built across 50, 60 miles of people's backyards that do not now exist and are going to be necessary to provide the flexibility in the grid to meet the reliability requirements that you'd expect of a modern electrical grid. So we're also looking at that challenge. We haven't talked about that at all.
Right. Well, I would say, again, if we're going to make a major decision that's going to affect billions of dollars and it's going to affect future planning, we better make it right. You go back 35 years ago when we said, let's go to coal because that's more abundant than it is for natural gas. Now we're trying to reverse that. Obviously, we should have done more studies 35 years ago instead of doing a knee-jerk reaction. We do the same knee-jerk reaction again, we're going to have the same kind of consequence if we don't do this right. So with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from a major natural gas producing state.